Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Art Bros.
Hey, people.
Fancy Dave, say hi to the people.
They know I love them.
And I'm Mike, as always, and today we're really excited because we actually have a special guest with us.
Mm-hmm.
He is our self-proclaimed Batman expert. His name is Nat Towsen.
Yep.
Hello.
Hello, Nat. Thank you for joining us on the show today.
And, thanks for joining our dumbasses.
So, we're going to do what we always do every time, and we're going to explain art to you guys. And this week, we're going to go with that whole talking about new forms of art.
Yep.
And we're actually going to talk about Batman.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
We're doing sequential art.
Yes.
Oh.
We're talking about page 22 of Batman Year 1. And you're looking at it on the screen right now. This is an iconic scene.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who thinks of Batman, anyone who really loves Batman, they know this storyline, they know this page. It was Nat's idea to talk about this. And, well we're going to talk about it. We have pretty much some points that we want to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
First, let's talk about who did this.
Who did this?
Yeah, Fancy Dave and Nat, could you guys give us a little bit of context of who made Batman Year 1 possible?
Sure, yeah.
Nat,
right.
why don't you
Yeah.
go ahead?
Want to take it off?
Yeah, so a couple of years before this, DC had sort of rebooted all of their continuity, which meant that no one really knew where the character, they decided to modernize everything, and they decided that someone needed to retell Batman's origin story, and this was before, everyone had done that in 8 different movies and TV shows. This was a novel idea at the time, and so Denny O'Neil and the editorial staff at DC turned to Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli, who, at the time, Frank Miller, who has created a lot of amazing comics at the time, was probably their biggest star. It was
one of the superstars.
Yeah, and people were calling him, if not the greatest current writer, creator, one of the greatest since the 60s, and they had already cut their teeth by a very impressive run over at Marvel on Daredevil, where they sort of reinvented that character with a bit of a grittier angle and really put the character through hell. Yeah,
the noir influence.
Absolutely, and just sort of a darker, more grounded sort of street crime take, and less of a silly bright color costume take on the character. So it was decided that these two guys would reboot Batman, and it's not a special series or anything. It's just the story is told through Batman number 404 to 407, and that's where they take over. They have not currently been writing Batman, and it just takes a break from the current ongoing storyline, and just with no warning, all of a sudden the first page is we're in Gotham. It's several years ago, and Jim Gordon has been transferred to Gotham, and Bruce Wayne on the same day, January 4th, in fact, is returning to Gotham after being away for a long time.
I don't know, where should we take this from here?
Well, I want to talk about the creation of a hero.
Okay.
That's what we're seeing in this piece right now. We're seeing the moment where he realizes, well, in order to kind of bring order back to Gotham, I think I need to scare the hell out of everybody. As you mentioned before, this is Batman coming back after a couple of years. He's just gotten... We see he's bloodied.
Yep.
He's just gotten his ass kicked. And for people who don't know the story, he just got his ass kicked by hookers and a pimp, I believe.
Yep.
And surviving
and then some cops.
Yeah, he got his ass kicked by some cocks. He got stabbed a couple of times.
in a car crash.
Yeah.
He essentially goes out and tries to help a prostitute and tries to, clean up some street crime, and he ends up basically being just another thug on the street, and no one is scared of him. The people he's trying to help stab him. It goes completely wrong. No one is frightened of him. He's just another would-be tough guy in a city full of criminals, and he just sort of falls into the woodworks there. He just another stab victim.
Just another stab victim, and he's realizing, like you mentioned before when we were talking about the notes before we started recording this episode, Nat, you were mentioning how he's deciding whether he should just sit here and bleed out, or if he should become something more.
Exactly. The page that we're looking at is basically I think the fourth in a sequence. He's back at Wayne Manor. He's sitting in an armchair, staring at a bust of his father, and the whole point is he's been trying to avenge his father all this time. He's been training, and he's basically saying, "How do I do it? I've been waiting 18 years. I can't wait any longer. I can't. He doesn't want to. He basically feels like he has no patience left, and he's like, how do I do it? How do they frighten them? I'd rather die than wait another hour. And he's basically decided that since he doesn't know how he's going to do this, that he's going to just let himself bleed out and die. And he's got the bell next to his hand, we see earlier on in the sequence. And if he rings the bell, Alfred will hear it, come and bandage him up. But he's essentially
Giving
beginning
up.
to resign.
Yeah,
He's debating whether he should do it or not.
Maybe just gone a little crazy because all this like years of training and mastering the sciences might have been for nothing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And after all that, he comes back and he just gets beat up like, just another guy in a bad neighborhood. And so he's basically lost his will. And that is, then we flash back on the previous page. You see him in the movie theater with his parents. You see them get shot. You see him, that iconic image of him standing in the pool of light with his parents. And it has we see young Bruce Wayne's eyes. And then as we turn the page, we see adult Bruce Wayne's eyes. And that's when the moment, which has been, as a very early Batman comic as well. The bat flies through the window, and that's where he sees this symbol, and that's what he's, he was afraid of bats as a child, and now he sees that as this symbol of fear, and that's where how he realizes he's going to elevate himself above just being a man. He's going to not just become, he's going to become something greater by creating this icon around himself. The sort of this power of iconography is what he needs to transcend just being another tough guy in the ghetto.
And what I think is very clear in this is he finds that something that he was frightened as a child has carried over to him as an adult. He sees, I'm afraid of this bat. I've always been afraid of this bat. Let me work on that. Let me become fear in order to stop. Will change these people. These people are not afraid of men. But they can be afraid of something bigger, something else. So
yeah, and I think it's no coincidence that they choose that. It's not just a scary thing. It's not just like something spooky. It's it's this mastery of his own fear. That's the thing that really is how am I going to scare other people by owning this thing that terrified me, and that's where he really steps into this greater role, is when he's not just trying to spook people out, but when he's actually taking possession of the thing that terrified him.
Beautiful. And Nat, can you touch on how cinema may have affected this specific sequence or this page right here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting, we see when you look at really early comics, let's say we look at the early Detective Comics when Batman was first showing up, you see a lot of grids, 9-panel grids, or just sort of even pacing. Every panel is roughly the same size, or, you have a big rectangle and then 3 even panels below. Comics, as cinema became more and more popular, as sort of the main form of pop culture, I think you can definitely see how comics are affected by film editing and film composition. Now, sometimes that's a bad thing because it locks people into just wanting to do widescreen panels where you can do a lot more with comic books. But I think it shook comics sort of out of that. Every panel is the same amount of time. Every panel is the same amount of space, right? So what we really see here is, like I mentioned on the previous page, we are seeing a lot of widescreen panels. But it's cinematic, first of all, in the way that the time is paced, right? There's essentially a voiceover. We're seeing a flashback with the same voiceover continuing. We understand that this is a flashback, although the voiceover is still in the present. And then we have what is essentially in film editing would be known as a smash cut. The end of page 21 is young Bruce Wayne looks up, and it's a wide shot of just his eyes. And then we cut by turning the page to the top of page 22, the one we've been talking about, which is a shot of adult Bruce Wayne's eyes. That's a very common editing technique to indicate, this is what he's been thinking about.
Definitely. You see that today in a lot of movies as well. It's a technique that's alive and well.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. And then an even more literal smash cut to the bat smashing through the window.
Literal.
Yeah. Well, it's smashing, right? But you can imagine that moment. But when you're reading this, it's paced so carefully that when you turn the page, it's almost shocking. This image of the bat coming through the window and the glass is shattering. You can hear it in your head. It's so well composed. It's so well paced and put together that image, especially because we go from these sort of simple images, like a lot quieter, a lot of black space, a lot of empty space, to all of a sudden this very busy image where you can see every shard of glass. It almost creates, like I said, the sound in your head.
It's so bright. You're right. It's
a good
very
sense
bright.
of movement, direction, speed.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fear.
And if we look at the use of the lighting in it too, obviously Mazzucchelli and Miller himself are deeply influenced by film noir tradition of the 1940s, especially. And we look and we see a lot of really heavy shadows. Essentially two-tone, three-tone images, not a lot of gray areas in between, and a lot of use of spot color and spot lighting.
Yeah, it's almost like flat colors, but there's just enough there to give it a little bit more dimension in there.
Yeah, it's definitely desaturated. They clearly didn't want to go all the way black and white, but they are able to sort of nod to that, which I think is interesting. We still, on this top panel, it's not black and white, it's yellow and white. It's black and yellow. It's still just these two colors. And you also see that use of very long shadows that shows up a lot in film noir. You used to, you usually see it through blinds, but of course he's got his ornate manners, giant windows there, but there's stripes down his face, and essentially using the light to highlight only what we really need to be seeing.
Yeah, the Rembrandt lighting too. That's taken straight from film noir. The lighting to the side and whatnot.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So what I do want to touch on is the creation of a hero, as I mentioned before, and why this resonates to me as a piece of art. People will ask me, well, Mike, how is this art? It's a kid's comic book.
How is this? This is for kids.
Yeah, so I will say, well...
Not anymore.
Not anymore. First off, the 80s, not kids' comic books. No. Frank Miller, not for kids. What I want to touch on is this is the creation of a hero, the moment he becomes a hero, the one that we know. And that source has been replicated in so many pieces of art throughout the centuries. I want to talk specifically about David and Goliath. I want to talk about how artists like Michelangelo, one of his most famous works is David holding the slingshot. And we have artists like Bernini, who is same thing, David holding the slingshot but getting ready to throw it. We have that moment where David becomes the hero that's been pretty much done by many different artists.
By throwing a rock.
Exactly, throwing a rock. Then we have things like, how many tapestries can you count that have King Arthur pulling the sword out of the stone, and then having like all the great moments of King Arthur and whatnot. So that's why this resonates with me. We look at those heroes and we say, wow, look at these artists, how they captured the moment where, David defeated Goliath, King Arthur has slain this army, and we have this right here, where the moment where Bruce becomes Batman. That's why this resonates with me. And David, I know you want to talk about just all the work that went into making this happen. All the different people, the all-stars. This page is a collection of not just, Zuccarello and Miller, but two other people that came together to make this happen. And Dave, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay, so, I guess if you want to get fancy, I guess the term for comics sometimes is sequential art. They're panels. They follow a sequence to tell the story that way. So, the writer, Frank Miller. We have our illustrator, David Mazzucchelli. Colorist, Richmond Lewis. And the letterer was Todd Klein. And these four people come together to make one thing.
Love it.
So, this really is, the sum of its parts. I guess we already talked about the illustration and the coloring, which I found interesting that Richmond Lewis was actually a painter, and this is like one of the very few times she worked on a comic, because she was actually the wife of Mazzucchelli.
Well, if you're going to work on a comic, make it Batman.
As well.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you, Nat?
Yeah. I've only made one comic, and it's the best one.
Oh, yeah?
Oh.
No, that's me being her.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
that's
nice.
like you can just retire after that. Be like, oh no, I don't really do comic work. I did color one of the greatest ones of all time, and I figured that was enough.
That's enough for me. Go out on top.
It's just on the bottom of a resume with an asterisk in the tiniest of fonts.
Yeah.
And I did this.
Speaking of fonts, you want to talk about the lettering?
Todd Klein, yes. All right. So, what's interesting about this is the narration, which is actually coming from Bruce, was lettered by Todd Klein, who's actually known for doing other well-known books such as Sandman, and he has a very distinct lettering style. In this one, the narration's actually done in cursive, which I found pretty interesting, compared to, in other parts of the book, Jim Gordon.
And we were talking about how even the lettering reveals a bit of their character, a bit of their personality.
Mhm.
Nat pointed out earlier that the lettering, the cursiveness, comes from probably his education and the fact that he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, right, Nat?
Yeah, absolutely. And you would imagine that this is how he learned to write, and it probably would, at no point, this is not the type of comic which you see sometimes where we're reading something that someone wrote later, like it's actually supposed to be a letter, which I think is interesting because it's more abstract. It's almost as if he thinks in cursive, like he's so well bred that of course this is how he writes. And then in comparison to, there's no objective narration in this. All the narration we see is either his thoughts or Jim Gordon's thoughts in the present tense. Also, they're not telling this story from the future. We don't know that they'll survive, for example.
Right.
Except for the fact that we do know because there are still Batman comics. Yeah. But
spoiler.
Even then, in the previous issue, Batman 403, it's later in the future, and Batman is alive, so we're pretty sure he's not going to bleed out here. But but nonetheless, like if you look at Jim Gordon's, if you look at his writing, it's very, it's
blue collar, I would say.
Yeah, practical. It's legible. It's what you would imagine him writing on a police report. This is it's
pragmatic in a way.
Yeah, pragmatic. It's a reflection of his character. What needs to be done. Whereas Bruce Wayne is obviously a bit more stylistic, and
it's almost like a purple prose in a way. Like it's very theatrical. Like, yes, Father, I shall become a bat.
Yeah, and we also sort of exactly. We see that he has to. He's trying to almost fit in with the common man earlier in the comic and be just another street tough guy, and it doesn't work for him. He is this whether he likes it or not, he is this more theatrical, this more stylistic person, and he has to, the moment that we see on this very page is that instead of being like the best tough guy, he sort of embraces that theatricality and uses it to his advantage to become something totally different.
He's keeping it real. He knows who he is, and he has to embrace that to become a better person.
If he denies it almost gets him killed.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. So, guys, is there any final thoughts on this before we end the episode? Nat, did you want to touch on something before we let everybody go?
Well, sure. I mean, you touched on this a little bit before, but I was thinking, you're talking about the creation of the hero and how you see in a lot of famous stories, you see that moment recreated over and over again throughout art history. And I think, when you guys asked me what's something in comics I'd like to talk about, I listed off a few things, and I would say comfortably that I've read at least tens of thousands of comic books in my life.
Right.
And that, I always want to be able to pull things up, but how many individual pages do I remember out of that, whether or not they were amazing when I read them at the time? And this is one of the few pages that was not a cover or a splash page where it's a single image. This is one of the few pages that sprung to mind, and I think part of that is just the power of how well composed it is and how iconic the moment is, like you were saying, and how important it is to the character. But it is also one that we've seen repeated over and over again. I mean, this story is sort of recreated in the Batman Begins, and Batman Mask of the Phantasm also draws heavily from it, which if you haven't seen, I cannot recommend enough. And DC even recently did a basically shot-for-shot reproduction of this that is animated.
Oh, yes, I remember.
It's very well done. They had to make a few tweaks. They drop a drug reference or two. They cut a couple of things. The prostitution's a little more implied than referred to, but the smart thing that they did, which I think, it always bothers me when comic book movies are not well paced and not well composed, because you have something that looks almost like storyboards to draw from. So worst comes to worst, you're derivative and well composed. And I think the smart thing that they did there was they essentially followed the panel structure, and they realized this is cinema influenced. It could just be a piece of cinema on its own, and they were really faithful to it. So I think that just speaks to the power of this book and this image itself of that's been repeated so many times since then that's the first thing I thought of immediately. And
the just like you've said, the repetition itself is just the power of the image of this whole page itself to show how iconic it's become. That it has been repeated that many times.
Oh, absolutely. A lot of people complain about how many times we've seen Batman's origin, but again, it's because it's such
good.
A strong. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah. It was good, that's why.
I want to make it again. Let's make something good.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, Nat, we want to thank you for being on this episode of the Art Bros with us. Thank you so much.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, and we'll be bringing you some more episodes soon. So, anyways, like us on Facebook, like us on Twitter, like us on YouTube. Specifically, subscribe to us, leave us some comments. Let us know what you guys would like to hear us talk about. And Nat, where can the people find you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Nat Towsen. You can check out my monthly show at the UCB Theater East Village called Nat Towsen's Downtown Variety Hour, where we give away free comic books and also frequently feature live comic book readings.
All right.
And you can check me out talking about comic books on the Nerdist's Comic Book Club podcast pretty frequently, where I'm a regular guest.
Awesome. Well, like I said, thank you so much, Nat, and thank you to the listeners today. We will see you next time on the Art Bros. So, everybody, peace out.
Till next time, people.
Bye.